Sparklings! So I'm back with another entry for my Fairytale highlight series, and this one is for the classic Snow White, also called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, depending on the adaptation. So this is originally a Grimm Brothers fairy tale. Everyone knows the story pretty well, especially the opening of the story, this idea of skin as white as snow, hair as black as coal, and lips as red as blood. It kind of has a staying power to it. There's something very interesting, very engaging about it, so that you can have this unrealistically fragile and beautiful princess with a jealous stepmother who tries to kill her, and then she ends up being saved by seven dwarves, and then the princess tries again with various means of poison. In most adaptations, there's the apple that puts her into a deep sleep, but in other adaptations, there's also a ribbon that she tries to corset her with, and she passes out until the dwarves undo it. There's also a hair comb that poisons her, and she passes out until the dwarves take it out of her hair. It just depends on the adaptation. The first film adaptation on this list is from 1916. It is a silent film. I haven't seen it as far as I'm aware. It is a short film. The next one on here is also a short film, which is a Betty Boop adaptation of Snow White from 1933. I believe I've seen it, but I know I've seen a handful of Betty Boop, but I'm never sure how much. But the first feature-length and probably best-known adaptation of Snow White is Disney's first feature-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1937. It still has held up very well. It's still a very beautifully done animation, and it's very cute. I haven't seen it in a very, very long time, despite having the DVD of it. I haven't seen it in probably about 20 years, and so I don't remember it as well as I could, but it's one of those things that's so heavily ingrained in popular culture that you're more likely to have seen it than not. Next one on here, which is Seven Dwarfs to the Rescue from 1957, is Italian, and I haven't seen it. There's also a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs German adaptation from 1955 that I haven't seen, and another one from 1970 from Turkey. I am not going to attempt to pronounce the German and Turkish titles because I will butcher them poorly, and hopefully I would probably insult somebody, so I'm going to refrain. But the next adaptation is from the Fairytale, from Shelley Duvall's Fairytale Theater from 1984. I didn't bring my Fairytale Theater collection over, but that's another one. And then from 1987, there is a musical Canon Movie Tales adaptation, which was a TV film that I haven't seen. But the next one on here, and one that I do highly recommend, is Snow White, A Tale of Terror with Sam Neill and Sigourney Weaver, two actors I'm very fond of, but this definitely ramps up a lot of the horror elements. This is not a child-friendly adaptation. The costume design is very stunning, and there's this kind of like very dark and gothic feel to the whole thing, which is one of the reasons I recommend it. It's not perfect, certainly, especially because the Snow White character herself is not especially interesting in comparison to her stepmother, who did try earnestly to be kind to her when they were first introduced, but when she miscarried, her affections that she attempted to have for her stepdaughter vanished, and she dabbled farther into black magic, and that's how you ended up with the film. But definitely worth watching at least once, even if it isn't for everybody. And then the next one on here, which is a TV movie from 2001, I honestly only investigated for Miranda Richardson, is Snow White, the Fairest of them all. It's a very weird movie in a lot of ways. Like, it's very different. It feels like a TV movie. I think it's a Hallmark TV movie, and kind of feels like it. It's a little too ridiculous for its own good. But it is very different than other adaptations and versions of the story that I've seen, which is why I included it on the list. And as I did in a handful of other fairy tale feature lists, I had to include the Brothers Grimm from 2005 because Snow White is a featured character in it. Like, she's referenced in it. with having to get a kiss from true love in order to wake up from a magical slumber. Next one, and people give this a lot of flack, as well as its sequel, Huntsman's Winter War, which I didn't bring over because Snow White's not in it, is Snow White and the Huntsman from 2012. And I have mixed feelings on it. It's not a great film by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a lot better than people gave it credit for, because in 2012 it was still in vogue to hate on Kristen Stewart. But it's still a very entertaining entry. It has a lot of really good style sensibility. I love the costume design more than anything else. And from what I remember, the costumes are from Colleen Atwood, so that does make sense. Charlize Theron is very good as the evil queen Ravenna, and Chris Hemsworth is entertaining. I mean, he usually is. So on the whole, it's worth watching and hopefully not judging based off of the cast alone, even if it isn't the best adaptation there is. My personal favorite adaptation of Snow White is Mirror Mirror, also from 2012, directed by Tarsem Singh, who I have talked about in a director spotlight. And this is Iko Ishioka's last film as a costume designer. She's probably my all-time favorite costume designer. And one of the main reasons why I enjoy the film so much is that the costumes are as much characters as the people wearing them. And it's very entertaining, and Lily Collins is very, very cute. And Julia Roberts, she really kind of took to the role very, very well. And I'm not a huge Julia Roberts fan. And yes, it is silly, and it's PG, and it's for kids and whatever, but I still think it's very entertaining and very sweet, and has a very good fairy tale sensibility that if this movie had come out when I was a child, I would have adored it. But alas, it came out when I was in college. I also brought over a couple of books of note. So one of these, it's a dark story, which is Tanithle's White as Snow, which, in addition to taking a lot of elements from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it also takes several elements from the mythology of Demeter and Persephone from Greek mythology. It's very bleak. It's not a pleasant read, but it's very well crafted and good for those that like the darker taste, because I know some people get all edgelord on fairy tales and talk about how fucked up they used to be. It's like, yes, we get it. But if you really were looking for something of that effect, this is probably more your wavelength. One of the things about it that's kind of interesting is that the stepmother's not a stepmother. She just aggressively hates her daughter. So she always acted as distant as if she was a stepmother. So it's a very strange and kind of bitter story. Another one on here, and this is a little bit closer to like YA fiction. And this one's very interesting in that it's not super antagonistic, and what it does with the story I thought was kind of entertaining and very different. It isn't perfect, but I do really enjoy it. I like singular novels more than series, if I can, but Girls Made of Snow and Glass is interesting, and like the two characters and the innate magic that they have is very different, and the struggles that they have trying to interact with one another and like recognize their relationship with one another and with themselves, I thought was more nuanced than I expected when I picked it up. So that was the other one that I would recommend. I'm sure that there are other novel adaptations. I just haven't looked that deeply into it. Those are just the first two that came to mind. Anyway, this is probably one of the best known fairy tales, and if you didn't already hear of any of these, now you have some to look into if you wanted. If you have other recommendations for this particular fairy tale, or for what fairy tales I should cover as well, leave comments. Till next time, Darklings.